Welcome to Life Stories, where every story is a journey of resilience, strength, and transformation. Today, we're diving into a powerful tale of overcoming rejection, betrayal, and finding the courage to rebuild from nothing. This is the story of a young woman who was abandoned by her family, only to rise up and prove that even the deepest wounds can fuel an unstoppable spirit. From a small town in Ohio to becoming a best-selling author and public speaker, her journey is one of survival and triumph. So, sit back, relax, and let's begin this incredible story today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I was born in a quiet suburban town in Ohio, a place where the streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges and every neighbor seemed to know your business, even if they pretended not to. Our house, a faded two-story with peeling paint, was just like the rest, nothing special. My family wasn't special either. At least, that's how it felt growing up. My mother, Nancy, was a wiry woman with tired eyes, always preoccupied with my little brother, Jake. Her frown was permanent, as though life had worn her down long before I was born. My father, John, was a mechanic, a broad-shouldered man who spent his days covered in motor oil. He rarely spoke unless Jake was around. Then he'd be all smiles, his booming laughter filling the house. Jake, my younger brother, was the golden child, tall, blonde, and effortlessly charming. He had a cocky grin that made everyone around him smile. A soccer ball was almost permanently attached to his foot, and every game he played was a chance for my parents to cheer for him, to praise him. They couldn't seem to get enough of him. As for me, I was the shadow, the girl who spent more time with books than with people, the girl who couldn't seem to do anything right. From the time I was a child, I tried to get their attention, but nothing ever worked. I remember one day when I was 10, standing in the kitchen, holding up an A+ essay like a trophy, hoping for praise. "Look, Mom, I got an A," I said, my voice shaking with hope. But she didn't even look up from slicing the crust off Jake's sandwich. "That's nice, Sarah," she muttered, barely glancing at me before turning to Jake. "You're going to be a star at the game tomorrow." I felt a pang in my chest as I stood there, watching her heap all her affection and excitement on Jake for kicking a ball while my words went unnoticed. Unimportant. Dad wasn't much better. I remember building a birdhouse in shop class. Every nail was perfect, every corner precise. It took me hours to finish. But when I showed it to him, he just nodded and said, "Good effort," before turning back to Jake, who had just scored another goal. "That's my boy," Dad shouted, clapping Jake on the back. I stood there, birdhouse in hand, feeling like a ghost. I was invisible, not just to my family, but to myself. By high school, I stopped trying to impress them. It hurt too much, so I buried myself in my books. Jane Austen, Hemingway, anything that could take me out of that house, out of that life. I spent hours in my room, scribbling stories, letting my imagination take me to places where I wasn't overlooked. My room became my sanctuary, a tiny space with a creaky bed and a desk piled high with books, where I could escape the reality of my family. Jake, of course, didn't understand. "You're wasting your time with that junk," he'd sneer, barging into my room, grabbing my pencil to do his homework, and never once looking at the world I was creating. Mom would call from the other room, "Jake, leave her alone," but she didn't mean it. She never meant it, and Jake would smirk and walk away, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my quiet rebellion. I started to think maybe it wasn't just that they didn't see me, it was that they didn't care to. They didn't care to know who I was or what I loved. I was just Sarah, the invisible girl, fading into the background, forgotten. The more I tried to fit into their world, the more I realized I didn't belong. I needed out. I needed to escape, to find a place where I wasn't the second choice, where I wasn't the afterthought. So when the army recruiters came to my school, all crisp uniforms and promises of purpose, I didn't hesitate. I signed up that week, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. "You're throwing your life away," Mom said, folding laundry without even looking at me. Dad just shrugged. "Your funeral, kid, And Jake? He laughed from the couch. What? You going to shoot stuff? You can barely carry groceries. I clenched my fists, the anger burning in my chest. But I didn't cry, not in front of them. Watch me, I muttered, and walked out the door. Basic training was brutal, grueling marches, screaming sergeants, the ache of muscles I didn't even know I had. But for the first time in my life, I felt strong. I felt like I belonged. My platoon became my family. There was Sanchez, a wiry guy with a quick laugh. And Kelly, a tough redhead who always shared her coffee when I was on the verge of exhaustion. You've got grit, Harper, Kelly said one day after I finished a 10-mile hike. My legs trembling, sweat pouring down my face. But I didn't care. I felt alive for the first time. Like I had something they couldn't take away from me. But I didn't know what was coming next. I had no idea that the hardest battle of my life wasn't waiting for me in the field. But back home in Ohio, 3 years into my service, everything changed. Afghanistan was a place that made you sharp, made you survive, or it killed you. I wasn't thinking about the dangers. The IEDs buried in the dust. The tension that gripped every step we took. I was laughing with Sanchez, joking about the dreadful meals we'd been served. When it happened, 1 second, everything was fine. We were walking the dusty streets on patrol, half laughing, half expecting something to go wrong. Just another day. The next second, it was an explosion, a deafening roar, a flash of heat, and then, nothing. I don't even remember hitting the ground. The blast knocked me out cold. When I woke up, the first thing I felt wasn't the searing pain of my injuries. It was the absence, the emptiness. I couldn't feel my legs. I was in a hospital bed. Tubes snaking from my arms. Machines beeping in the background. The pain came later. At first, it was dull, as though I were floating outside of myself, watching the horror unfold. But then the sharp, biting reality set in. The nurse's voice broke through the haze. You're alive, soldier, she said, her tone soft, as if trying to reassure me. Alive. But what did that even mean anymore? I didn't know. I didn't know who I was. What I was. My body felt foreign to me now. And the more I tried to process it, the harder it became. They had to amputate both of my legs below the knee. My life, the life I had known, was over. And yet, I was alive. And somehow, that felt worse than the injury itself. The journey back to Ohio was just as painful, but in a different way. I was wheeled through the airport, my body still numb, and when I arrived at my family's house, I could already feel the weight of what was to come. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheelchair, the hospital bandages on my stumps aching. I could barely get out of the car when we arrived. But it wasn't the physical pain that tore me apart, it was what awaited me inside the house. Mom was the first to see me. She stood there in the doorway, her eyes flickering over me before she let out a heavy sigh. Oh, Sarah, she whispered, her voice hollow, as if I had spilled milk. Not lost my legs. You'll manage, she said, as though my life had somehow become just another inconvenience for her to deal with. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Why'd you have to go and get yourself hurt? He muttered. As though I had chosen this fate. Jake, sprawled out on the couch with a soda in his hand, snickered. Hey, Wheels, need me to push you around? The anger boiled inside me, hot and bitter, but I swallowed it. I was better than this. I was stronger than them. I'm fine, I said through gritted teeth, pushing my wheelchair past them and into the house. The reality of it all hit me as I wheeled myself into my old room. The doorway was too narrow for my wheelchair. A bitter irony that stung in the moment. I had changed, but the house, my family, was exactly the same. It felt suffocating. The room that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a cage. That night, as I lay on a lumpy cot they had shoved into the living room, listening to Mom whisper to Dad, "She's so dramatic," I felt my heart break. I had always known they didn't see me. But now, they didn't even try to. They saw a problem to be dealt with, not a daughter who had fought and lost everything. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to leave. I had to escape this suffocating place. I packed up what I could, clothes, my notebooks, a photo of me and Kelly from training, and I called a cab. "Where you going, kid?" Dad asked, scratching his stubble as I struggled with the front steps. "Anywhere but here," I snapped, not looking back. Jake laughed from the porch. "Good luck." Mom just stood there, arms crossed, silent. She didn't say a word. The cab driver, a gruff man named Mike, helped me load up without a word. As we drove away, I didn't look back. The city stretched out before me. And as we passed the familiar streets of my hometown, I felt something in me shift. There was a spark, a feeling of freedom, sharp and wild. I didn't know what came next. But I was done letting them control me. I was done waiting for their approval. I had $2 in savings and absolutely no plan. But I was willing to take the risk. I left my family behind and headed to Chicago. A city as loud and gritty as I was feeling inside. It didn't matter that I had no family there. No safety net to catch me if I fell. I needed to be somewhere far away from the life I had known. Somewhere where nobody knew me. Nobody expected anything from me. Where I could just be. I rented a tiny, rundown apartment above a deli. The place had flickering lights, a leaky sink, and a smell that clung to the walls. But it was mine. The first night, I sat by the window, watching the snow dust the streets. My chest was tight, like I couldn't breathe, but I wasn't crying for my legs. I wasn't crying for the life I had lost. I was crying for the family I had never had. The one I had always dreamed of, full of love, support, and understanding. I wiped my tears away, opened my notebook, and started writing. The anger poured out of me. The pain, the loss, the bitterness, I wrote it all. But I also wrote hope. I wrote about resilience, about finding strength when there seemed to be none. I wrote about a soldier who rebuilt herself. Not from the outside, but from the inside out. A soldier who took her broken pieces and turned them into something powerful. Something unbreakable. I posted those stories on Wattpad. I was shaking when I hit publish, unsure of what would come of it. But as the comments trickled in, I felt a rush of relief. People were reading my words. People were seeing me. This hits hard. Keep going. My heart raced. Someone saw me. Someone understood. By 2022, I had self-published my first book, Shattered Spirit. It was raw, messy, and unapologetic, but it was my story. And it resonated. In 6 months, it hit the bestseller list. $110 landed in my account. The numbers on the screen didn't seem real. I laughed and cried, overwhelmed by the reality of it. I had done it. I had made something of myself. Writing became my legs. Every day, I rolled into coffee shops, typing furiously on my laptop, the noise of the world buzzing around me. A barista named Tara, with her blue hair and kind smile, started slipping me free coffee whenever I came in. "You're that writer, right?" she asked one day. "I saw you on Twitter. Unbroken, badass." "Thanks," I said with a smirk. Got to keep the lights on. Twitter became my megaphone. I shared my struggles, my victories, the ups and downs. Snippets like Day 492, Still Standing garnered thousands of likes and retweets. My followers grew, and so did my spine. I was no longer invisible. I was strong. I was visible. By 2024, at 28, I was speaking at bookstores, conventions, and panels. My voice was steady even when my hands shook. I had found my confidence. My voice. I wasn't just Sarah anymore. I was unbroken. I was someone who had fought and won. My second book, Shattered Dreams, sold for 6 figures. And soon, I had moved into a penthouse in Chicago. The skyline was my new backyard. A reminder of how far I had come. But the past always has a way of creeping back. It was a crisp fall day in 2025 when they showed up. Mom, looking thinner, her hair gray, stood at the entrance of a bookstore where I was signing copies of my latest release. Dad loomed behind her, his hands stuffed in his pockets. My pen froze as I saw them. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Mom's eyes welled up. It's Jake, she said. He's in trouble. Drugs. Gambling. He's lost everything. Our house. Our savings. My jaw tightened. This was the moment I had imagined for years. They were begging me to help Jake. To save him. They wanted my money. But as I stood there, a strange feeling washed over me. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I gave you $500 last year, I said, my voice low. That's all you get. Mom grabbed my arm. He's your brother, she cried. I yanked my arm back. The years of neglect flashing before my eyes. The brother who called me Wheels. Who laughed while I bled. I could feel the anger rising. But I didn't let it control me. Fix your own mess, I said firmly. Dad tried guilt next, his gruff voice filling the space between us. We're family, Sarah. I let out a bitter laugh. Family? You left me to rot. The conversation dragged on for a while, their pleading growing more desperate. But in the end, I blocked their numbers. I cut the ties. For good. I tweeted. Sometimes cutting ties is the only way up. It went viral. Thousands of retweets. People were cheering me on. Strangers, people I had never met, were supporting me. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I had done it. I had turned their rejection into something bigger. Something stronger. It wasn't just about money or fame. It was about showing them that I was enough. That I didn't need their love to be whole. They didn't own me anymore. I'm 30 now. Richer than my parents ever dreamed and respected by strangers who feel like family. I don't check on Jake, and I don't wonder if Mom's still crying. I don't need to. I have built a life that's mine alone. No more second guessing. No more trying to fit into a mold they made for me. My penthouse in Chicago, with its sleek glass walls and the vast city skyline, is a constant reminder of everything I've accomplished. It's not just a house. It's a symbol of survival, of fighting back, of becoming unstoppable. When I look at my reflection, my messy brown hair and sharper green eyes, I don't see the girl I once was, the one who felt invisible. I see a woman who fought for every inch of this life. I see a warrior who took the pain, the abandonment, and turned it into fuel to create something beautiful. I see me. The person I always was but could never quite see until I stopped trying to make others see me. Every word I write, every stage one stand on, every conversation I have with someone who feels just as lost as I once did, is a middle finger to the past and a hand extended to the future. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us, those who've been rejected, overlooked, or underestimated. We all have the power to turn that pain into something bigger. Something powerful. So, if you're struggling, if you've ever felt like you don't matter, know this. You are enough. You don't need anyone's approval. You just need to believe in yourself. Hit that like button if you're with me. And subscribe for more life stories. Let's keep this going. Life's too short to let anyone else write your ending. Keep fighting, keep dreaming, and never stop proving them wrong.